5 Live Formula One.
Welcome back to live coverage of the Spanish Grand Prix ahead of the 7th race of the season. On the way for you, another hour of running for Free Practice 2. And guiding you through all the coverage is myself, Harry Benjamin, former McLaren mechanic Mark Priestley, and the BBC's chief F1 writer, Andrew Benson. The risk of rain has gone down from Free Practice 1. It was about 30%, now it's about 10%, but the real chance of rain coming Saturday and Sunday. So we could well have an interesting race on our hands around this Circuit de Barcelona, Catalonia. 4.6 kilometres, 2.8 miles, 14 turns, 8 to the right and 6 to the left. And of course we have a new chicane. Well, we know we've got rid of the chicane and we have a new corner, a new old corner. They've brought back the final long right-hander, which is turn 14, last seen back in 2006 around this track, and that is going to have an impact on the lap time. We're already seeing much quicker lap times than we were last year, and also though tyre wear generally high around this track, but it's going to have a real impact on these tyres, of which Pirelli have bought the white-walled hard, the yellow-walled medium and the red-walled soft. But as a warning, if you missed Free Practice 1, we're going to be getting some tyre testing going on. Pirelli will field a revised construction with each driver getting 2 sets of hard tyres. Idea is to introduce them for the British Grand Prix, and the reason they are bringing this around is because Pirelli want to make the structure of this compounded tyre more resistant to fatigue ahead of 2024, but it's already getting to the maximum, so they're going to try and bring it in before the British Grand Prix. So we will be expecting some drivers to be out there on unmarked testing tyres. Andrew Benson.
Yeah, so what that basically means is that Pirelli are worried about the tyres exploding.
Yeah, we've seen that before.
Yeah, exactly. The forces of these cars are really high anyway. It's a tough job to make tyres that can withstand the forces that the Formula 1 cars create. The performance of the cars has gone up more than they expected, Pirelli, and so they're having to redo the structure. Has to be said, it is a bit of a recurring theme with the Pirelli tyres. It has been for the last 12 years or whatever it is since Pirelli came in, but and there are engineers in the pit lane who will tell you it's to do with the way that Pirelli make their tyres, that the reason it has this issue repeatedly, but you know, they are trying to get on top of it, so that's what that's about. Also worth mentioning, you were talking about the corners and the tyres there, Harry. The tyres that they've used here, because of the demands of this track, they are the 3 hardest compounds from Pirelli's range. There are actually 6 different slick tyre compounds. Actually, it's not quite the hardest because the really, really hard isn't being used. I believe it's the second hardest hard, because the first hardest hard is
the
really,
C0.
It's really too hard, which is why they introduced the new hard. It's the 3 hardest tyres, apart from that one in the range, because of the demands of this track. And it's the last 2 corners, Harry, that have changed, actually, because the old track did turn right in a similar sort of place, but it was a bit earlier to get to the chicane in a much slower corner. Whereas the new penultimate corner, or the new, what number is it again?
13.
13, thank you, I keep forgetting that number. Must be unlucky or something. It's a really fast corner, that right-hander, followed by another fast corner, not quite as fast, onto the pit straight. They weren't quite flat out, were they, Mark, through there in the first practice session. We'll see what happens when they do their qualifying simulation runs about halfway through this one.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the thing. There's always bragging rights associated with being able to go through those final corners flat out, and we'll see if anyone's able to do it. It looked like Max in his Red Bull perhaps managed to do it on occasion, but what we did see was this phenomenon of the car bouncing or porpoising. Remember that word? Porpoising. It's back. It's back just heading into the final corner, and it's no laughing matter, really. It's almost affecting all cars, certainly most of the cars we saw having some kind of impact of bouncing, and what that does is really unsettles the car going into this really fast right-hander where the car's already really hanging on for dear life. It's right on the limit, and what you need is maximum aero to keep that car stuck to the floor. You want to have your throttle foot buried on the pedal, And if the car's bouncing, of course, you can imagine what an unsettling experience that is when you're right on the limit anyway. So I suspect there's been a lot of work come down the pit lane happening in all the garages, trying to tweak the setup, change things like ride height, some of the spring rates, things like that, just to try and compensate that, just to give the drivers that confidence they need before they get onto that long start-finish straight.
Yeah, and drivers then getting ready to head out of the garage. Nick De Vries in the AlphaTauri, one of the first out, but he's not the first. Oh, he will be the first out because Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin was right at the end of the pit lane, but he just ducked to the right so he could do a practice start and get underway. But it's green flag, green light at the end of the pit lane. Practice 2 underway, and for those who want to sync up, here it is for you. It's 59 minutes and 32 31 seconds on the clock as the Spanish driver on home soil, Fernando Alonso, makes his way towards turn 1. And Mark, I mean, you mentioned the porpoising there. We talked about the last 2 corners really providing so much higher speeds and how much effect that is going to be on the tyres and the degradation throughout. But this track was already hard on tyres anyway to begin with. Temperature, air temp 24 degrees, track temperature just under 37 degrees as well. It's going to be a bit of a headache, right, for them to try and get as much understanding as they need from these cars, because we're also running these new Pirelli tyres for testing. So it's not like they could even get a full grip of what they're going to be doing come qualifying.
Well, that's right. I suspect, in the first practice session this morning, what we'll have seen is teams with sensors all over the cars. See a lot of those big aero rakes, the great big scaffolding-like structures that house lots of little aerodynamic sensors, measuring airflow around lots of the new components. Lots of upgrades being brought to lots of teams up and down the pit lane. So this morning was all about really understanding whether those upgrades are giving the same numbers that they saw back in the factory in their simulations and on the wind tunnel, and getting an understanding of what this final part of the lap looks like on each individual car. This afternoon, though, it gets a bit more serious. We're going to see more and more teams getting rid of the test tyres as early as possible, I would imagine, and then we switch to the serious business of going to soft and medium tyres, looking at qualifying runs, and then the all-important long runs. They're going to really dictate the pace for Sunday and dictate the strategy. You mentioned tyres, very abrasive circuit, and as you said, tyres are always kind of on the limit in terms of degradation. How will that final part of the lap really affect that? Will it switch it or swing it between a 2-stop and a 3-stop even strategy for Sunday, which we always get the best races when there's a mixture of strategies, and typically this one's been a slam dunk 2-stopper. So will that change to the circuit layout? Maybe just tweak that to a point where there is more than one way to get from lights out to checkered flag quickly.
Well, the grandstands are certainly starting to fill up. Not completely full around here, but as Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin skates by the grandstand, some of them a sea of green, wearing Aston Martin T-shirts, applaud the Spaniard as he makes his way by. Not the only Spaniard in the field, though. You're listening to Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari, just teetering around turn 12 and approaching turn 13, getting ready to turn the wick up for his first flyer. And Carlos Sainz then on coming around the final corner now, and he is out there on the soft compound of tyre. Now, Ferrari have brought upgrades. Were supposed to be introduced in Imola. That couldn't happen, so they're bringing them to Barcelona. We have seen them in action on Carlos Sainz's car in FP1, Andrew, with particularly all focus on these side pods. They've switched that around for this session, haven't they? Leclerc now gets them.
Yeah, I don't think these ones on the Ferrari were due in Imola. I think it's the Merc ones that were due in Imola. These ones, for a fact, the Ferrari drivers were saying yesterday that the factory really worked hard because this upgrade was aimed for later in the season. And because they've had a difficult start to the year, they've done everything they possibly can, pulled out all the stops to get them onto the car for this weekend. They've got enough for both cars, but they're very keen to back the upgrade. So this morning it was Sainz with the upgrade and Leclerc with the sort of standard spec, if you like. This afternoon, it's, I say this morning, it's like old style speak, sorry. In the first session, used to be in the morning, now it seems to be the middle of the afternoon, and then the middle of the night for the second session sometimes. But
we need
anyway, I'm just showing my age there. And this afternoon, it's Leclerc with the new parts and Sainz with the old ones. Sainz looks like he's about to go fastest, actually, although Verstappen's just gone fastest himself, Harry.
Yeah, Carlos Sainz does indeed go fastest. A 1:14.999 on the dot for Carlos Sainz. He is, though, on the soft rubber, whereas Max Verstappen is second and is about 6/10 behind on the harder test compound tyre. Charles Leclerc puts himself up into second spot now as well, just behind his teammate, 6/10 the gap. He is also on the soft tyre, so first lap times coming in at the moment, but the two Ferraris on the soft. Esteban Ocon is out there on the hard. Hulkenberg, Magnussen, Norris all on the medium, along with Albon and Bottas and Zhou Guanyu. Everybody else on the test tyre.
Yeah, and actually, that Ferrari time from Sainz, the 14.9, there was a fair amount of time left on the table because he had a big moment where he had to really back off coming into the final corner. It's that final corner, part of the two revised ends of the lap. The two final corners have changed. As we said earlier, much faster, sweeping right-handers. There's been a lot of talk about whether it looks like they'll be flat, and it may well be that the cars at the front of the field, certainly by qualifying at least, will be able to take those flat, and that's really going to catapult you onto this long straight where then you start to see sort of maximum speeds all the way down past the pits and down to the big braking zone of turn one. So that's where we're hoping the changes might start to positively impact any opportunities for a DRS pass into the braking zone of turn one.
Just seen Nick De Vries come across the line in the Alpha Tauri into ninth fastest. This is the sound of George Russell, though, in the Mercedes, coming round the final corner now.
You can hear the bouncing up.
Quiet a lot, bottom.
So he makes his way around the final corner, has to even have a slight lift as well, we heard there, and just starts to bounce as the car hits the bottom of the track, essentially, and then he straightens it up, DRS open, and away he goes. But he is not the only one that has been experiencing that so far. No,
of course, what's happening now, which didn't happen in the previous layout, is the final two corners now are under sort of almost maximum aerodynamic load, which means the car's now at high speed. It's getting all of that aero on. It's a high downforce circuit anyway, this one, so it's pushing the car down onto the tarmac. And because you're going at high speed and you're right down, squashed down in your suspension on the bump stops almost, anything like that where you start to either get bumps in the circuit itself or you get this aerodynamic porpoising, that term we all got familiar with, it just throws the car off, and before you know it, you can be in the gravel. So the drivers need confidence to go through there quickly, and as I said, it affects the whole of the straight that follows it. If they haven't got confidence, of course your end of straight speeds are going to be way down, and in the race situation, if you can't get on top of it, you're sitting duck.
Pierre Gasly in the Alpine was really pushing on that last lap around, not in terms of lap time, but the rear end of that Alpine coming through turn 13, nearly looking like it was about to head off into the gravel. He managed to keep it going in a straight line, though. He's on the test tyre, and that last lap time now was good enough for 12th as Alex Albon comes across the line in his Williams up into 7th spot. So it's Sainz and Leclerc who currently occupy the top two spots. Sergio Perez, the Mexican in the Red Bull, is the sound you're hearing into the braking zone of turn 10. The left-hander has to nearly run out wide, but that's really what all the cars are doing. A couple of goes on the steering wheel, that immediately brings you into turn 12, the technical final sector, and then you gear up really for this double right-hander. 13, a little bit of a straight where you can then dive into the pit lane entry to your right if needs be. Round the final corner, DRS open, carry as much speed as you can. And Perez on the testing rubber, down in 14th at the moment for that lap time, but he makes his way down into turn one, and an important weekend for Sergio Perez to bounce back after a disaster Monaco. Crashed out qualifying, started last, and really in Monaco that's the end of your race.
Yeah, it was terrible, wasn't it? You will want to put that behind him. It didn't look comfortable, I have to say, through the last part of the lap, right from turn 10 through turns 11, 12, and even the final two corners. A huge lift going into the final turn. Yes, he's on the hard test tyre, but the car just wasn't making it into the apex. It's not what we see in the sister car from Max Verstappen, and he's already gone through on the hard test tyres as well, albeit 6/10 off the two Ferraris right now, but he looked a lot more comfortable, Max. Sergio looks like he's still fighting that car a little bit, so some work to do from a setup perspective perhaps on that side of the garage.
That was the voice of the former McLaren mechanic, Mark Priestley, alongside myself, Harry Benjamin. The BBC's chief F1 writer, Andrew Benson, is here as well, with 50 minutes and 55, 54, 53 seconds on the clock for this second free practice session and the last bit of track running for the Formula One cars today. Of course, we've got support action around here as well, which is going to mean the track evolves even more throughout the case of the weekend, rubbering in. But the Formula One action out at the moment. Sainz is still the fastest out there with a 1:14.9, currently 6/10 ahead of his teammate Charles Leclerc, who is running the upgrades to that Ferrari, which they're bringing in. They've taken a huge amount of inspiration from the Red Bull design with their side pod, although Fred Vasseur, coming into the weekend, the team principal of Ferrari, saying, unlike Mercedes, we don't need a massive new concept. We just need to bring small incremental upgrades, because Ferrari have been looking quick. It's not like they've completely dropped off the pace. They haven't, the S word, strategy calls. Monaco, they were looking quick and they were up there. So really, it's just about staying there and trying to find those incremental increases.
And their big weakness has been the race, hasn't it? Because in qualifying, they have been quick. They've been as quick as Red Bull, and even quicker on some occasions when they get everything right. They've got a very quick car over a single lap. But what happens in that scenario is you tend to have a car that switches your tyres on very well. You get them up to temperature. So over a single lap, they work really well out the box. The sort of flip side of that is in the race, they can't manage their tyres very well. They have much higher degradation levels than people like Red Bull, as an example. They've got this instability that the drivers keep talking about, where either aerodynamically or mechanically, the car's unstable and unpredictable at times throughout the lap, even partway through a corner at times. So from a driver's perspective, that's your worst nightmare. You need confidence. You need to know what the car's going to do when you hit the brakes, when you turn it in. You need to absolutely be sure that it's going to do what you expect. And if it doesn't do that, psychologically, you tend to back off a little bit. You won't go into a corner at 100%. And it only takes a little bit of that happening around a lap before your lap time starts to drop away.
I just want to make an observation about this Ferrari. I touched on this in the that noise you just heard is Pierre Gasly going over the exit curbs at turn 9, which is one of the fastest corners on the track. In the back-to-backing, as we said, so Sainz with the upgrade in the first session, Leclerc with the upgrade in the second. In the first session, Leclerc was quicker than Sainz in the old car. So far this session, Sainz is quicker than Leclerc in the old car.
That doesn't bode well.
Good observation, yeah. Well, nice. I thought you were going to follow that up.
He said it all. He said it all right there. I did want to point that out, because on that last lap around, while we were hearing Pierre Gasly running over the exit curves at turn 9, Leclerc had it gone faster, but he was still 2 tenths behind his teammate Carlos Sainz. I know it's really early days still in this free practice 2 session, but as Andrew rightly notes, it was the other way round for the entirety of free practice 1, with Sainz behind Leclerc. But it looks like they might both be displaced by Max Verstappen in the Red Bull, who makes his way uphill through turn 9, and he's fastest of anybody through sector 1.
And the other thing to say about that is that Formula 1 designers constantly tell you, oh, you can't just copy a bit of a car, because a car works as an integral whole. So if you stick one bit of someone else's car on your car, even if that car that you're copying it from is quicker than yours, it might not make your car go faster.
So everyone taking pictures of the Red Bull floor in Monaco.
The floor's a different matter, because the floor might be the fundamental key, almost certainly is the fundamental key as to why that car is so quick. It's not just the floor, but that will be a large part of it. And Max Verstappen does go fastest now on the medium he's switched to, the standard medium, by 300ths from Sainz. He pops to the top. I wonder if we're going to see the truth of that. At the same time, that doesn't always apply. I remember in 1997, when Adrian Newey left Williams, he went to McLaren and he had 9 months, something like that, gardening leave. And his first race at McLaren, they put on an absolute carbon copy of the Williams front wing onto that car, and it did make a night and day difference to the performance of the McLaren. That's Russell off.
Who was that? The McLaren. Yes.
So that's Russell in the Mercedes, finding the gravel, going on at turn 10, getting a little bit caught up behind Piastri in his McLaren. And that's the last place he wants to be finding himself in free practice 2. He manages to rejoin, and hopefully no harm done on that occasion. But Russell not particularly happy with the Aussie in the McLaren.
It's an interesting point that you make there, Andrew, because you're right. There is some truth in the fact that you can't just take a piece of one car, bolt it to another car, and have it have the same impact. But what it does do when you start to see these concepts appearing on other cars is it just changes your train of thought as an aerodynamicist or a designer. You start to understand what they're trying to do, and then when you get back to your own wind tunnel, you can start to apply that same train of thought. And there's lots going on inside the car, underneath the car, that sort of conditions airflows to different parts. And so it typically isn't just taking one piece. They all have to work together. But there's also this idea that we saw Aston Martin pioneer to some success, where you can literally copy the whole car. I mean, Aston Martin turned up with a Red Bull just painted a different colour to all intents and purposes, and that has transformed their fortunes, hasn't it?
Well, I'm going to defend Aston Martin a little bit here. It does have the Red Bull concept on it to some degree. There's no question about that, with the undercut side pods and all the rest of it. But there are some quite significant differences as well. It's got this sort of, I can't think they call it the water slide on the top of
I'm actually talking about the one they brought halfway through
last year. You're absolutely right. Last
year,
year, that really was a carbon. Whereas this one, ironically, having signed Red Bull's aerodynamicist and made him technical director, actually this car, if anything, looks less like a Red Bull than last year's upgrade did. But just to finish the point I was going to make, Hamilton's just coming through to complete a lap. I'll just tell you how fast he goes. Not very. He's 8th. Is that
9th with a 1:16.0, but he got a little bit squirrely coming through turn 10 and 11.
I just wonder whether Ferrari, and it's very early days, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I think people will be watching it to see if it does happen. Are these upgrades that are obviously led by the Red Bull design, are they actually going to make the Ferrari and the Mercedes, which were designed to a different aerodynamic concept, two different aerodynamic concepts, are they actually going to make them quicker? It's going to be interesting to see.
It is going to be interesting. And you know, in the past, you might have had the freedom within the huge budgets that the top teams had to redesign the chassis and the floor and everything to go with a new set of side pods. And that is literally what we would have done back then. Today, you can't do that. So you're having to compromise. Mercedes, they can't redesign everything. There isn't the budget to do it now. So they've had to come up with the best solution within the confines of the current chassis they've got, and that means heavily compromising the aerodynamic package but trying to make the best of it.
It really looks like that too. When you look at that Mercedes, it looks like they've stuck a Red Bull style side pod onto a car that was packaged for something else,
which it was.
Yeah, exactly. No surprise, really.
Well, I suppose we see how that all unfolds, but it wasn't too long ago that we had the pink Mercedes as well, isn't it? So, you know, it's not the first time we've seen complete copies or inspirations transferred across, but of course that was Racing Point coming in at the start of the year with those implementations heavily based off of Mercedes coming halfway through, well not halfway through, a third into the season is a different matter. 42 minutes, 51 seconds of practice 2 remaining. It's Max Verstappen fastest on the median tyre with a 1:14.9. He's in the pits though, as is Sainz and Leclerc. They are the top 3. Sainz 0.03 of a second back, then Leclerc a couple of tenths away. Alonso, Perez, the top 5. Russell, Stroll, Norris, Ocon, Hamilton, the top 10. Piastri, Hulkenberg, Zhou, Bottas and Albon, the top 15. Magnussen, Tsunoda, Gasly, De Vries and Logan Sargent is 20th and last. Yuki Tsunoda is on a flying lap though, comes across and up into 6th place, the Japanese racer for AlphaTauri, who had half a mega Monaco. Great qualifying into Q3. Really rinsing that AlphaTauri for everything it's worth. And even his teammate Nick De Vries having a much better weekend of it too. Qualified in 12th, finished there. But a lot of pressure on him as well after a slow start to the season, not meeting expectations, the Dutch rookie. But Yuki Tsunoda continues to impress me this season in a field that it becomes incredibly more and more competitive to try and steal even a point. If you take Monaco out of the way, he's finished 10th or 11th every single time. Yeah,
I think that's fair. I think, he's definitely made steps of progression since he came into Formula One, and that's all that any team was looking for from a rookie, is to continually moving forward. Of course, what you're desperately looking for is the Max Verstappen story, isn't it, who comes in the first race and wins.
Maybe check that lower just in case, because I feel like I lost with a little gear.
So that was Carlos Sainz having just run over curbs and scraped the bottom of his car quite hard, asking his team to check. Teams are looking for the fairy tale story, which is a Max Verstappen coming in, moving up to the main team, winning at this circuit on his very first outing, and of course going on to do all the wonderful things he's done since. But that is a rarity. That doesn't happen very often. That is the golden ticket. Much more commonly, it's looking for your young drivers to show a sort of lineage of progression. And that's what you want to see, continually moving forward, continually learning. Yes, you're going to see mistakes, but as long as they learn from those mistakes and don't continually make them, start to really improve lap times, competitiveness with teammates. And I think Tsunoda is doing most of those things. He's got to keep that consistency and improve that consistency, but I think he's showing signs of, that will really keep the team happy, and hence he's got a new contract for this year.
And the team principal of AlphaTauri, Franz Tost, has a history of giving his drivers 3 years. That's the school of Formula One. Give them 3 years, and then you can make a decision on whether or not they continue. And this is Yuki's 3rd year with that team, so he's done it at the right time. But of course, it is a bit of a farewell season for Franz Tost. He will be leaving the team, one of the longest-serving team principals, and Laurent Mekies from Ferrari will be coming in, and bit of a structure change at AlphaTauri amidst all the talks earlier on in the season that Red Bull might be planning to sell it. They've refuted that, and AlphaTauri will have a new team principal, a new structure going into next year. And Nick De Vries looking like he's managed to make a slight step up. Certainly Monaco went a long way with Dr. Helmut Marko, the Red Bull advisor. And De Vries currently in 6th in this, so let's see how the AlphaTauris get on. But that battle, what we have seen for sure this season, okay, Red Bull out of the way, we have a nice kind of battle brewing between the top teams that make up the points paying positions more often than not, but it's still, the field spread is so tight. The Hasses, the Alfa Romeos, I think you can include McLaren in that, the Williamses, the AlphaTauris, it's so tight between them all every weekend.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it is a shame that it's a shame from a neutral's perspective at least, that we've got this one team in Red Bull so far out in front, because imagine if they were in that pack as well, then that's almost the ideal scenario that Formula One's been desperate to achieve with the regulation changes, with the cost cap, the more equitable split of prize money. They're all designed to try and close the field up, and it's kind of worked, apart from this one team Red Bull that have bucked the trend and done such a good job that actually they're streaks ahead of everybody. But I expect over the next few years, with the measures that Formula One have put in place, particularly financial, but also technical and regulatory, I expect that to just gradually close out. I expect the cars to start converging in performance, and I expect in 2 or 3 years, we've got the potential to have a really great championship that's close for all up and down the field.
Music to everyone's ears, that, Mark, I think.
You might just have to wait a couple of years.
Yeah, just a couple of years. The fans are up on their feet, clapping as Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari screams past. He's making his way through the final corner now. That's the sound you're hearing. The Spanish racer on the soft compound tyre, looking like he is about to go fastest, and indeed does so. A 1:14.2, nearly 7/10 quicker than Max Verstappen, and the crowd are liking that one, and clapping and applauding as he makes his way down into turn 1. Of course, one of 2 Spanish races here, but immediately he's displaced by Charles Leclerc by just under 0.03 of a second. His teammate goes fastest, a 1:14.2. It's still Ferrari 1 and 2 at the top in free practice 2, Andrew.
I think Sainz has got the upgrade on that car.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Looking at the side pods, they look a lot flatter than previous.
This shape here, sorry, I'm talking on radio, so this shape here, but I'm comparing it with a picture on the internet that I'm looking at, and I'm 99% certain that Sainz definitely has the upgrade on. Maybe they both got it on this session.
Well, what's changed is that a Ferrari using last year have had this kind of dip, really, the kind of bathtub like central section in that side pod, and that's gone, and now it's more level.
And also towards the sort of in the second half of the side pod, the old side pod is, ironically, the old side pod is more undercut and the new one is less, which is not what you'd expect of an upgrade that's following the Red Bull trend, which has a really pronounced, we're looking at the Red Bull now, a really pronounced undercut scooped out from the side pod all the way around.
Okay, well,
so just to defend ourselves, Harry,
yes.
it was Fred Vasseur, the team boss,
he did say that,
who said they would swap them over for the session and back to back them. So maybe Ferrari's engineers decided that they were going to change their minds on that.
Well, we've the eagle-eyed of us will spot that, but either way, it doesn't change the positions of where they are. They are first and second, and Carlos Sainz peels into the pits. Valtteri Bottas is on a hot lap at the moment in the Alfa Romeo, currently down in 18th on the soft tyre. His teammate as well, also on the soft, just ahead of him in 17th place. It's not really going the way Alfa Romeo wanted it for this season, is it, Mark? Valtteri Bottas' only points-paying position coming at round 1, finishing in 8th. He's still feeling optimistic, but he's had to realign his goals for this season as he makes his way uphill towards the right-hander of turn 9. That's the sound you're hearing on board with Valtteri Bottas.
Yeah, it must be frustrating for them because they've shown signs in recent times of signs of real positivity. Opportunities have popped up and they've taken them on occasions. They've found themselves well inside the top 10, but only on occasions. And actually this year what we've seen is a much bigger trend towards them heading towards the back end of that midfield. And with the likes of Williams taking a reasonable step forward, they're finding themselves in a battle more often than not, really towards the back.
And of course they're gearing up for Audi coming on. Of course it's Alfa Romeo, but the team being operated by Sauber, that will become Audi, with Sauber still being involved within that team. Alfa Romeo, their title, sponsorship, partnership being terminated. And rumours about if they might stay in Formula 1 at the moment, maybe talks of joining Haas. That's still very much gossip in the paddock. But certainly then Alfa Romeo hoping to find a bit more improved pace. Bottas on that last run went 4th. And that is the sound of Logan Sargent nearly finding the gravel. Well, he actually did find the gravel, but he kept it out coming into, just coming out of turn 12 and into the double right-hander of 13 and 14.
And for the first time this session, we've seen our championship leader, Max Verstappen, put the soft tyre on. He's just gone 3/10 quicker at the top of the field. Esteban Ocon actually is second right now, but it was the two Ferraris. So that sort of battle between the Ferraris with their potentially with their upgrades that should potentially bring a performance improvement against the class-leading car of Max Verstappen, shaping up at the moment, albeit very early days, with Max still out front.
You say it early days as well, as Hulkenberg pops up into second in the Haas, just over 2.5 tenths behind Verstappen on the soft tyre. Mercedes brought their new concept design for Monaco because they could and they had it. Really, all thought was going to be, right, we'll see what it's really made of here in Barcelona, a track that is an all-rounder circuit, one that everyone has been to before, copious amounts of testing. So far, they've done nothing to light up the room.
No, and I think the problem that Mercedes have got, and we sort of touched on it earlier on, is their actual base concept. The reason the car was designed and the concept the car was designed around was clearly flawed. I mean, it must have shown good numbers in the wind tunnel and through their simulation. It must have shown potential, but they could never realise that in the real world. And so now they're on the back foot. They're having to make the best of what they've got, which is always going to be a compromise, as we said. And it almost feels like they're floundering a little bit. They're sort of clutching at straws, looking for a way out of the mess they found themselves in, where really what they want to do is go back to the drawing board and start again. But the earliest genuine opportunity to do that is for next year. They could have done it for this year, but they chose not to. Now they're in a position where they've absolutely proved it doesn't work. Certainly doesn't work the way they want it to. So next year, 2024, I have no doubt that behind the scenes they are taking a blank sheet of paper and having another go at this, and they will probably turn out a car that has some resemblance, at least to some extent, to the cars of Red Bull and Ferrari.
And that has had a consequence as well in the technical department too. They've swapped around the roles of James Allison and Mike Elliott, who was more involved in this car. Now Mike Elliott taking a bit of factory-based role, bringing James Allison back. So that's had a direct input into the way Mercedes is operating. Speaking of Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton is on a belter of a lap right now, so he's completely undoing everything we've just said, and he runs perfect line, almost a little bit deep, but he keeps it nice and tidy, nearly coming through 10 and into the right-hander of 11, but he has to do a complete bit of anti-lock on the steering wheel to keep it pointing in a straight direction. The sound you're hearing is the 7-time champion through the final corner, has to lift off slightly, but it's going to be a good lap time from Hamilton. He lost a lot of time though, actually, in that final sector.
That final corner.
Yeah, 6.5 tenths off, 8th only for Lewis Hamilton. It looked so good in the first sector, fastest of anybody in the first sector, but then it just went away from him as the lap unfolded.
Well, we know how susceptible this car has been from its inception, really, to this bouncing and porpoising, and we don't know the exact details yet, but with that phenomenon coming back in that final part of the lap, it does look like their car's suffering more than others. He had to lift off so much in the final corner because it's just unsettling. It literally is bouncing its way around an incredibly high-speed, high-load corner of turn 14, and no driver can live with that.
Hamilton then only good enough for 8th at the moment, and now on a bit of a cool down lap. 30 minutes and 53 52 seconds remain of practice 2. My name's Harry Benjamin. Alongside me is the former McLaren mechanic Mark Priestley, and we're joined by the BBC's chief F1 reporter, writer, Andrew Benson. Sorry, Andrew, got that wrong. Writer. Stern look from the right-hand side of the booth there.
No, I was just amused. I'm both, actually.
You are
Harry,
both.
Yes.
True. Writer and cover reporter. Verstappen is fastest at the moment, a 1:13.9, just over 2.5 tenths from Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas. Then it's Esteban Ocon, Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. But times to be taken in these practice sessions with a slight pinch of salt, because we've got a really big mixture of tyre compounds out there. We're not entirely sure about fuel runs either. We're running a test tyre at the start of this session. Pirelli bringing 2 sets of hard tyres that they're wanting to test ahead of an introduction of the new hard tyre for the British Grand Prix onwards. So we've had that to deal with at the start. Upgrades being tested too. So there's a lot happening within the teams, and only a few, well, there are actually a fair few drivers in the pits. Verstappen, Hülkenberg, Leclerc, Sainz, Albon, Sargent, Perez, Stroll, Piastri, all of the pits, but everybody else is out on track at the moment.
We've got Alonso just coming out now on the soft tyre. I'm really interested to see the battle between the two Spaniards, actually. I'm interested to see who's going to come out on top, and I'll throw it out to you guys. Who's going to come out on top this weekend between Alonso and Carlos Sainz? Sainz with the Ferrari upgrades, Alonso in the form of his life.
I think that's a really easy question to answer. I'm sorry. I could
It's
be
Carlos
wrong.
Sainz, obviously.
I think it's going to be Alonso.
I mean,
I really do.
It would point towards him. But, I mean, how good is this Ferrari car going to be? They need a step forward with this upgrade. We may not have seen it just yet, but it is only the start of the second session. So I wonder, can they start to make improvements where at least we know they're quick in qualifying, right? So maybe the question should be who's going to come out on top on Saturday.
I think it depends how truthful Ferrari are being about their upgrade. They're very much trying to manage expectations at the moment. Yeah. They're saying, it's only a small upgrade. It's the start of a development path. There's more upgrades to come. Alonso's coming to the end of his lap, so we'll see his lap time in a second. I'll just stop talking. He's gone second fastest behind Verstappen, so just a 10th off. So pretty impressive from the Aston Martin there. Or is it really actually a really big upgrade and they just don't want to say that yet? Because if they don't want to say it's a big upgrade and then it turns out to be rubbish, it's better for it to say it's a small upgrade and then it turns out to be great. So let's find out.
Under promise and over deliver, that's what you're after, isn't it?
Thank you. I'm supposed to be the writer here, aren't I?
No, you're the reporter. Zhou Guanyu is on a decent, she's lost a lot of time in the middle sector. The Alfa Romeo driver currently in 11th fastest, and he loses a bit more time, stays 11th, but Zhou on the soft tyres. In fact, everybody is on that soft rubber except for the 2 Ferraris who have come out back onto the Pirelli test tyre, the harder compound that is being run for these first 2 practice sessions.
Yeah, it's almost like Ferrari are trying to not let us see how good their upgrade is, isn't it? Running out of sync with everybody else and blah, 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 you know. Are they trying to hide something?
Ferrari trying to hide something? Never. There's a good lap from Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas, actually. A 1:14.1 on a soft tyre. Up there in third and back into the pits and having a debrief with the team. Ocon 4th, and then come the 2 Ferraris running out of sequence, as you said, Andrew.
Yeah, I think we're going to not get a proper read on the competitive order.
You mean Hülkenberg and Haas aren't going to qualify third?
Exactly, from the one-off lap times. Maybe the race sims will be a bit different, race simulations in the second half of the session, but it looks to me like something's going on here. The Alpine, you could almost say, because, as we were saying, he was quick in Monaco, Gasly qualified 5th in Miami, so it's not that big a surprise to see Ocon up in 4th. Hulkenberg, I don't think Haas have got an upgrade that's going to move them up from the back of the grid to the front, so something's going on there.
Low fuel, maybe.
And Ferrari, as I said, they've run out of sync, so their soft tyre runs were on a track. Yeah, you just seen Piastri have a big oversteer moment coming through turn 10 in the McLaren. Because Ferrari ran earlier, the track won't have been in as good condition when they did their soft tyre runs, so they'll look artificially slow as a result of that.
Hashtag BBCF1 as well, if you want to get involved. Just over 26 minutes left to go, and despite that moment for Oscar Piastri coming through turn 10, he finds a bit of time and goes up into 11th spot and quickly moves out of the way of Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin, who comes on by. And actually McLaren making some big signings in the technical department. Rob Marshall from Red Bull will move over as McLaren's new technical director, engineering and design from 2024 onwards. This comes in the wake of a bit of a reshuffle at McLaren. James Key departing as technical director, and Marshall with a lot of pedigree, spent 17 years at Red Bull, particularly playing a huge role in their championship winning years from 2010 to 2013, and was also with Renault during Alonso's championship years before that. So this is a big signing for McLaren, isn't it, Mark? And big intentions set out for them, clearly.
Yeah, big signing. I think that's absolutely right. It sort of signifies their ambition in that they've had big restructures, and that's going to take some time to play out, whether the new positions that they've created, particularly around the technical department, actually work. So instead of having one outright technical director, as has been the traditional way to run things, they've now switched that up and split it amongst 3 people, all reporting into the team principal. So we'll see if that works. There's no reason that it can't work, but it is a change. But it's also a real sign that these big players are willing to come to McLaren, isn't it?
Okay, Max, looking like 9 timed.
Someone's phone is going, is that helmets?
Yes.
Interesting. Max talking to his engineer as the phone rings in the background. I was just going to finish that point, is that these big names that are coming to people like McLaren, Rob Marshall definitely being the latest of those, is also a sign that McLaren are looking to build something big, because they've clearly, it's not just money that tempts these people. These big players within this sport, they want to see a project that they can be part of, that they believe in, that they think is going to grow and ultimately will deliver success. Rob Marshall, I have no doubt, is not just going there for a big pay packet. I'm sure he's getting a big pay packet, but that won't be the only motivation. So perhaps behind the scenes in that deal, that tells you a little bit about what McLaren are building in the pipeline.
And no major upgrades for McLaren currently. Andrea Stella, the team principal, saying the next major upgrade will be between Austria and Silverstone. So a month or so to go before we see that. But double points last time out in Monaco, albeit overshadowed by Alpine getting a great result with Esteban Ocon and edging away from them in the Constructors' Championship. I'm sure McLaren, given the start to their season, will take that in a heartbeat for now. Okay, 23 minutes and 38 seconds. Verstappen fastest, Alonso second, just over a tenth and a half behind from Verstappen. Then it's Hulkenberg, Perez, Ocon the top 5. Leclerc, Sainz, Russell, Bottas, Gasly the top 10. Hamilton, Piastri, Zhou, Norris and Magnussen the top 15. Nick de Vries is 16th in front of his teammate Yuki Tsunoda. Then it is Lance Stroll, Albon and Sargent. And Lance Stroll had a bit of a slow FP1 too, actually, compared to his teammate. And we've been speaking a lot about Fernando Alonso for obvious reasons, home race, and coming off the back of nearly a win in Monaco. It wasn't meant to be. Conversely, the other side of the garage, Lance Stroll, not on a good run of form, pointless in the last 2 races. Amazing start to the season, considering he was coming in with broken wrists and even managing to get into the car in Bahrain. But really off the pace in Monaco, it seemed, and he hasn't started Spain, as it appears to us, in the best of circumstances.
No, and I think not just off the pace in Monaco, but also a number of mistakes, a number of things that you can only put down to driver error, particularly in the race. It was almost, I mean, the amount of memes I've seen online of cars, you know, clattering off walls, down tunnels. He
was rather playing bumper cars, wasn't he?
A little bit. And the problem is that this sort of stuff starts to impact your confidence as a driver, and people like us start talking about his future. And there's no doubt, as a young kid, this will have an impact. He came into the season, as you said, off the back of a sort of wave of positivity where he'd overcome tremendous adversity to get himself into the car, was celebrated for that, rightly so. But over time, the last few races, the story has become a bit more of a negative one, particularly not just with what Lance is doing, but with the opposite side of that coin, what Fernando's doing in the same car. He's showing the potential of that car, just how good it is, and yet Lance is not able to replicate that. So that will start to get into his head, I'm sure. There's no way it can't. And perhaps, I mean, we all know that a large part of performance in F1 is psychological as a driver. If that's got into his head somehow, it will start to have an impact.
Coming back to McLaren, just hashtag BBC F1, and we're talking about the big signings in the technical department with Rob Marshall moving over from Red Bull. Argyle has said on Twitter, but until the McLaren wind tunnel comes on stream, etc., all these new signings of McLaren will have a bit of a limited effect. Now, this new wind tunnel is expected to come online in the summer, so it's nearly there. But actually, when will we see the effects? Will it be next year's car, or will it be the year after?
It will have an effect on next year's car. I mean, up until this, next year's car is, make no mistake, well underway. I mean, they start that project even before this season has started in its very initial phase. So they're having to use the Toyota wind tunnel for that kind of thing. But of course, the early part of a car design is actually done in simulation rather than moving to a physical car in a tunnel. So it's the latter stages that will take place. So I fully imagine when they get the wind tunnel up and running in the summer, by the time they get wind tunnel models through the system, and particularly when they start to get larger car models into that wind tunnel, it will have a major impact on next year. Don't forget people like Rob Marshall. Rob Marshall's not really starting there until next year as well. So these things should all come together at about the right time and hopefully have a big impact. The problem is, because it's the same with, they've got a new simulator coming online at around a similar time, the problem is that if these things don't deliver results, they've almost kind of run out of excuses. Everything's been pushing towards these new developments happening, these new people coming in place, the new structure in place, the new hardware, the new wind tunnel. That's all great, and it should, or it could, all lead towards success. But if it doesn't, then what's the, what are we going to be pointing as being the problem?
How impressed have you been with Oscar Piastri in that McLaren? Obviously a rookie, 2-point scoring finishes so far. Has been there or thereabouts with Lando.
Yeah, I mean, I think I go back to what I said when we were talking earlier about Yuki Tsunoda. I think he's not set the world alight yet, but that is a rare occurrence for a rookie to come in and do that. It doesn't happen very often. But I do think he's been there or thereabouts. As you say, I think he's been close to Lando on many occasions. I think that's it. I think he's not made people sit up and go, wow, because all the talk, remember, over the last couple of years was about how Oscar Piastri was the next greatest thing, and he may well still be. I don't want to take anything away from him yet. It's way too early to judge his career in Formula One, but he hasn't come in like an absolute whirlwind and opened everyone's eyes. But as I say, that's rare. I think he's doing a steady job. I think the team are impressed with him, the way he's working behind the scenes, and I guess that's all you can ask for at this stage.
Yeah, well, Piastri currently in 12th and just heading out for an outlap. Norris as well, putting in the lap times. He's just starting a run on the medium compound of tyre. Piastri with some decent form around here. Go back to 2020 in the FIA Formula 3 race. It was the second of his 2 wins that year that took him to the title, and you would have heard the hype around Piastri coming in and off the back of winning Formula Renault Euro Cup, then straight into Formula 3, winning that at the first try, and then into Formula 2, and well, a year on the sidelines at Alpine in Formula 1, and a rather well publicised contractual disagreement he had with the team saw him end up at McLaren. And you wonder if you think, well, did he make that jump a little bit too soon? But I think from what I understood it, McLaren made a big effort of him. They wanted him. Alpine didn't necessarily make the big, we really want you, we need you. Is that incorrect?
What happened was Alpine messed up their contracts.
Well, and that, yeah.
I mean, Alpine wanted him, and they thought he was under contract, but he wasn't, and he kept asking for a contract, and they didn't give him one, and Piastri lost faith that they wanted him enough, and so he signed for McLaren.
Well, that's
and
the thing,
Alpine tried to
enough.
fight. They tried to fight to get him, and the contract recognition board said, what are you talking about? You don't have a contract. In fact, they lost 2 drivers last year, Alpine, let's not forget. They lost Fernando Alonso as well. I don't know what they thought they were doing. They were refusing to give Fernando Alonso a 2-year contract because apparently they wanted Oscar Piastri, but at the same time they were trying to farm Piastri out to Williams for 2 years. Well, if he was at Williams for 2 years, here's that Gasly's radio?
Quite a lot of clouds. Yeah, turn 3.
Yeah, copy that.
Yeah, and Gasly, of course, was the guy they ended up with.
Radar at this point. Track temp is dropping a little bit with that cloud covered up.
Nice weather update there from Alpine. No sign of rain just yet, but it is getting a little bit darker in the clouds. No, you're completely right, obviously, but my point, I suppose, was just trying to come back. Yes, they mucked up the contracts and they let him go, but if Piastri had really felt that the team wanted him above all else, he might well have found a way to stay there.
Well, I think that was the problem. But the thing was, they did want him, but they just messed about.
Didn't do it quick enough.
And he wasn't convinced that they did. And he was thinking, I don't want to be farmed out to Williams for 2 years. Although, actually, it's not such a bad thing because McLaren haven't been that great this year. But,
yeah, true.
But, that's what he was thinking. I want someone who believes in me. I want someone who's going to give me the best possible drive I can get next year. And meanwhile, Alonso was thinking, how dare you think I'm not going to be quick enough in a year's time to justify another seat? And if you don't want me, well, fine, I'll go somewhere else. And I think Ocon Alonso is a better driver lineup than Ocon Gasly, but there you are.
Really?
Don't you?
Well, it's hard to disagree with the Alonso, but the way, I suppose, I think last year, Mark, there was with Ocon and Alonso, they weren't the most harmonious of teammates. I mean, one memory of harmony with Ocon winning and in Budapest and Alonso being an amazing teammate there and holding up Hamilton and celebrating with him. But there was a lot of times on the track through the radio where you felt like the team were a little more Ocon based, French team, French driver.
Well, I think they had a slightly difficult car last year. It was always these things are always more frustrating when, the results are not coming your way and drivers get frustrated. I mean, goodness knows, we've seen Fernando do all sorts of things over his career when he's been frustrated. I do think we've got a much more mature Fernando Alonso now, and we're seeing that in an even greater extent this year. But it is much easier to do that and to play that game when things are going well, when there's an air of positivity around you. When you're getting frustrated because the results are not happening, we all do it. You get a bit frustrated, you get a bit tetchy, you start to lose your temper a little bit easier, and those things come across. And of course, those are the radio messages that we hear. They're the ones that get broadcast, and it does form this opinion. So, I don't know. I think we're seeing a Fernando Alonso today that's in a really strong place, in a great, perhaps the greatest point of his career, where he's got all the experience, he's got the maturity to go with it, which perhaps he lacked earlier on. And I think Aston Martin are now the beneficiaries of that. It could have been that was Alpine benefiting from that, but if, in the way that Andrew suggests, they haven't looked after their drivers in the right way, they haven't got their organisational part of, or their operational part of the business, locked down, these are the kind of, in any business, these are the kind of things that you suffer.
Talk about a tangent. We really went off on one there, didn't we? Yeah. That's the voice of the former McLaren mechanic, Mark Priestley. The BBC's chief F1 writer, Andrew Benton, is here as well, alongside myself, Harry Benjamin. This is live coverage of Free Practice 2 for the Spanish Grand Prix at the Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya, with just under 14 minutes remaining of this session. Verstappen is currently fastest with a 1:13.9, ahead of, by a tenth, Fernando Alonso in second. Then it's Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas ahead of Perez and Ocon, the top five. Leclerc, Sainz, Russell, Bottas and Gasly make up the remainder of the top 10. It's a bit of a jumbled up order. We're not entirely sure of fuel running too, but we've had test tyres out there which are required to be tested by Pirelli. A harder compounder tyre, slightly revised construction ahead of being introduced for the British Grand Prix. So that has changed up some of the run strategies. We've got new upgrades out there being ran by some of the teams. Mercedes getting their first proper look, perhaps, at their overhaul of a car, which they first brought to Monaco. Ferrari bringing upgrades too, and a few other teams bringing some bits and bobs to try and find every tenth they can as we rapidly make our way through this season.
And of course, what's happening now in the closing part of this session is that we are going through these long runs. So every single team and driver is now doing extended stints where they put on different tyres, mediums and softs typically, and they're trying to understand how the car behaves over a longer stint, where the car's full of fuel or at a greater fuel level. They're trying to work out how tyres degrade, so how much does the lap time come down as the fuel burns off and as the car starts to do these longer stints. How does the new circuit layout affect that? We talked about it earlier on, the final two corners, very fast right-handers.
It's a very light raindrop around turn 9.
And that was George Russell.
Here we go.
Yeah, a little bit of rain just around the final part of the lap then from George Russell, an observation. But they want to get these long runs in to understand how the car's behaving, because that then forms your strategy plan. How many pit stops are you going to make? How long can you go on a certain tyre before the degradation gets to such a point where you have to come in and make a pit stop? How long is the pit lane lost time? The cars are going to be going way faster around the final part of the lap than they used to be, and that means the time you spend in the pit lane has an even greater impact on your race time because everyone else is still going quickly. The circuit is very abrasive here, so with that high energy, the two right-hand corners at the end of the lap being very high energy on a rough bit of tarmac, does that really take a huge amount of life out of the tyre? So these are all things they're trying to learn now, and that learning will come through driver feedback, but also all the data they collect throughout this session.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the pit stop loss time. It's looking at around just over 22 seconds currently, all being well. That's the data I was fed coming into this weekend. But absolutely, for all those reasons, with those double right-handers really through 13 and 14, they bring you back round onto the main straight, really seeing a dramatic drop in lap time. Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin is back out on track. He's currently down in 18. He's had a bit of a slow session, really, similar to FP1, but he's not finding time. He's going to be going for one of a longer run on the soft compound of tyre. Who else is out there? Sainz is out there on an outlap, but he's on the testing tyre. No one really going for quick ones as we get into the final 10.5 minutes of free practice 2. Full focus then on the data they can gather ahead of the race on Sunday and what kind of strategy we might see. Last year, the winning strategy was a 3-stop, alternating between the soft and the mediums for Verstappen. But no one used the hard tyre last year because they didn't really like it. But now we've got a new hard tyre for 2023. That could well prove promising.
Well, it could do, and it will depend. And don't forget, we've got a chance of rain on Sunday as well, which could throw a cat amongst the pigeons. No one at the moment on the hard tyre, other than the test tyre. There's a couple of people still on the test tyre, but everyone else testing out the soft tyre and the medium, which I have no doubt will be the two preferred tyres around this circuit. But if you can save a set of brand new hards, and if the race and the degradation looks to be a little bit more extreme than people might have predicted, it may be that hard tyre comes into play. But it looks like no one's going to really find out. No one is really going to get a feel for that tyre until they have to use it if they do in the race, because they're not testing it now.
We've spoken a lot about track alterations and track changes for obvious reasons with the final corner, but also turn 1. It's not so much the actual corner, but it's the wider escape road that's there as well. It's a much narrower line you've got to take, very similar to I think back to Sochi or something, where you had to drive through a particular almost painted line, and then on the other side of it is gravel. So if anybody runs wide there, they have to make sure they go through that section of the track. Otherwise, well, I imagine a penalty may well be coming to them. So that's one of the other changes, along with some new barriers that's there down at turn 1. So we'll have a bit of barrier change talk. Just over 8.5 minutes of practice 2, barrier talk there. But just some other changes to be aware of, perhaps, in that long run down, 595 metres from pole to turn 1. If you're starting on the softs, that's going to give you the best start down there, isn't it, if you're on the front row? And of course, this race, 29 of the 32 races here, one from the front row. The sound you're listening to is Logan Sargent in the Williams, who comes across the line, and Sargent is currently last, 20th and last. He's on the medium compound and tyre. He's getting a nice toe, though, from the Haas, and goes down the inside of the Haas into turn 1, and they get awfully close, side by side, coming out of 2 and into 3. The Haas wins out. This is not the race, it's free practice 2, but if we get any that kind of action, I'll be quite pleased.
That was very close, wasn't it, between those two cars?
I think that was Hulkenberg
and Sargent, was it?
Yeah.
Wheel to wheel almost coming through turn 1, and that's what we're hoping to see more of course, in the race. We're hoping that the long run down past the start-finish straight, past the pits on the right-hand side, it's a very long run from the start, so that long run down to the first corner is a very long opportunity for overtaking. But coming out the flying fast corners at the end of the lap now should give us even higher speeds going on to that start-finish straight. So by the time we get to the end of the big braking zone for turn 1, cars are going to be doing well up around, if not well over 200 miles an hour, I should think.
We're just getting another look at how close Hulkenberg and the Haas and Sargent the Williams got, and a bit too close for comfort, I think, for free practice 2. And we spoke about the rookies earlier. We haven't spoken about Logan Sargent too much. He is 20th and last. It's been a tough rookie start. Nick De Vries, with that 12th place finish in Monaco, gets ahead of him. He's now not at the bottom of the driver's standings. That goes to Sargent. But there's still a feeling around the American that the pace is there and it's coming. And I suppose now that we're getting to tracks that he may well know a bit better, we could see a slight upturn in form.
Yeah, I suspect that will come into play, because a lot of the circuits that we've been to in recent weeks have been street circuits. They've been new tracks or places that he wouldn't be familiar with. So that will certainly help him. But I think that the Williams car is better this year generally. It's still down towards the back. We're not saying it's suddenly taken giant leaps into the top 10, but on occasions it does do that. The problem that Logan Sargeant has is that Alex Albon, I think, is a pretty decent driver, and he's on occasions getting really strong results or running in very high places with that Williams, and that, unfortunately, which depends which way you look at it, right? It's unfortunate in that it shines the light on what the car can do, and if Logan Sargeant can't match that highlights a negative. But it also means that if you've got somebody like Alex who's very well versed in that car, quite experienced now as well, it does give you someone really good to learn from in your rookie year. So hopefully he's taking those learnings and he's gradually getting better and better. And look, I don't think he's a guy that doesn't deserve his place on the grid, so I hope he continues to improve.
Absolutely. Right now, though, it is the two Williams that occupied 19th and 20th with their fastest lap times, 4/10 between Albon and Sargeant currently. And then just ahead of them is Lance Stroll. The sound you're hearing is Stroll's teammate coming through the right-hander of turn 9 onto the back straight, Fernando Alonso, on home soil, and the scene of his last race win a decade ago around this track makes his way through the left-hander of turn 10 into the technical final sector that's been so heavily revamped for 2023. Really important when it comes to looking after your tyres as well. The DRS detection point comes at you as you head into turn 14. Pit lane entry to your right. Little lift off for Alonso and across the line. And with 5 minutes to go, he's not on a fast one, but he's on P2 at the moment, just a tenth behind Verstappen. With 5 minutes to go. Hamilton also out on track, and everybody out on track.
Okay, well, Harry, listen, there are 5 minutes to go in this session. The man sitting to my right needs no introduction. He crunches numbers for breakfast. He has them on his cornflakes. He dreams about them at night. He's even got his own theme tune. He's certainly no Mo Farah, but it is time for Long Run Corner.
Long Run Corner with Andrew Benson.
Well, it's not the easiest session to read, I'm afraid, Mark, because the two Ferraris, whose race pace is probably the most of interest today, because they've got this new upgrade on the car, which is intended to improve their race pace. They did their first runs on the hard test tyre, and no one else has been running that. Nearly everyone else has been running the soft. And also, on top of that, Max Verstappen did his first stint on the medium tyre, and he was really quick on it. Won't be surprising. Anyone will be surprised to hear that. And he's also really quick now. He's turned to the soft, but his soft run won't be comparable with everyone else's because he's already done 9 laps on the medium, so he's got less fuel in the car. Of the people we can compare, though, Charles Leclerc looks pretty decent on his run on the soft tyre. He's averaging 1 minute 20 seconds dead on his laps. Fernando Alonso did two laps and then came into the pits, so I've only taken his next 2 laps. He's about equal with Leclerc. So that's a good sign for the Ferraris, whereas the Mercedes of Hamilton and Russell are about 3 or 4 tenths down on the Ferrari and the Aston Martin. So that's not good for them. And the Alpine of Esteban Ocon is slower again. So, as I say, I wouldn't want to be reading anything into this. I'll get more numbers a bit later and I'll try and reflect them in my report. But at the moment, and Sergio Perez also slower than Alonso and Leclerc, but matching about the pace of Hamilton and Russell on the soft tyre.
Difficult, tricky session, really, to understand fully what the picture is. And we're on board with Sergio Perez in the Red Bull, who just had a little bit of a moment on the uphill approach to turn 9. His father watches on, Antonio Perez, with his showbiz smile, thumbs up to the camera from the Red Bull garage. You can't help but smile when you see Sergio Perez's dad. He's a brilliant man to have around, especially if his son is on the podium. Right now, though, Perez down in 4th place. He's on the soft tyre, but he's not finding too much time. Here's Ocon.
Deployment's all over the place.
Yeah, copy, we'll have a look.
Now, what kind of deployment is that?
So he's talking about the deployment of their energy from the hybrid system. That's strategically deployed at different parts around the lap, and it can be set up to happen automatically. The driver can do it with a button on his steering wheel as well. But what he's suggesting is it's happening in the wrong places. It might be harvesting when he doesn't expect it to, and he's not getting the right amount of deployment where he needs it at certain parts of the lap. easily fixable. It's something that they can easily recode into a new map, and they will do. So it's not the end of the world, but it's clearly something that's just on the mind of Esteban Ocon right now. Interesting from what Andrew is saying, Andrew's analysis there of the long runs. I guess it's kind of good for us, because what that's saying is we just don't know. Yes, the Red Bull of Max Verstappen is out front, but I think we can almost take that as a given at most races, if not all races this season so far. But behind that, it's still a bit of an unknown. And as we head into qualifying on Saturday, and even more so the race on Sunday, we don't yet know who's going to be quick. We've got lots of changes to lots of different cars, and yet we still can't quite figure out how that's worked for everybody. So the first time we will find out is when it happens for real on Sunday, and I guess that's a positive for us, right?
Yeah, I think it is. I don't think Mercedes will quite be reading that the positives out of that, especially with all the hype around their new concept of car.
Well, they of course will have a much better picture inside the teams. With no disrespect to Andrew, they know a lot more about what's going on their cars. They have a lot more data at their fingertips than just lap times that Andrew's furiously trying to work with here. So they will have an immediate understanding just after the 2 sessions today as to whether they've got the numbers they expect, whether they're below what they expected, whether there's opportunity to fix those and improve over the weekend, and that's exactly what they'll be doing tonight.
Well, just 10 seconds left of practice 2 as Verstappen comes across. He'll get one more lap in if he pleases, and he's on the soft tyre, and everyone's on the soft tyre bar Hülkenberg, Perez, Hamilton, Piastri, Zhou Guan Yu, Magnussen, Albon and Sargent in the long runs, but they come to an end as the checkered flag is out. Final laps being done, data gathered. We'll have one more practice session to inch out every 10th they can before we're then thrown into it with qualifying and the race. And with the threat of rain very much in the air, we could well get another Monaco, but this time the walls aren't so close and it could prove even more chaotic.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think there's potential for this to still be a good weekend, and even if it's Verstappen dominating, I think behind that there's so much still to play for, and I think that's something that we can really cling on to over this weekend. Can anyone topple Max? I'm not sure, but what goes on next in the order I think is still up for grabs.
Well, so at the end of all that, Max Verstappen is fastest at 1:13.9, just a 10th ahead of Fernando Alonso. Nico Hülkenberg ended up third in his Haas, then it's Sergio Perez, Esteban Ocon the top 5, Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, George Russell, Valtteri Bottas and Pierre Gasly the top 10. Lewis Hamilton in 11th in front of Oscar Piastri, Zhou Guan Yu, Lando Norris and Kevin Magnussen the top 15. Nyck de Vries, Yuki Tsunoda, Lance Stroll, Alex Albon and Logan Sargent make up the remaining 20 drivers. So initial takeaways then, Mark, from free practice 1 and 2. Happy with the new track design? You think this is really what Barcelona needed?
Yeah, I'm happy they've made the change, because it was something that everyone's been crying out for years. Nobody, I don't think, liked the old chicane that was there. So I'm really pleased that we've switched it to this, what wasn't a historic layout. The results of that, in terms of how will it affect racing, we won't really know from today. We won't know that until Sunday, but that's something to be keeping an eye out for. What we've learned today, I think, is that there are still more questions than answers. Looking on from the outside, as Andrew explained so well there, it's very difficult to read because of the drivers running and teams running out of sequence with their different tyre runs, and with upgrades on top of that, with the new circuit layout, with the bouncing that people are suffering going into that final corner, that's so upsetting for the car, and therefore such an important and significant part of where your lap time comes from. I still think there's a lot more performance to be found, and that of course will be happening. Every team will be running simulations back at base overnight tonight, trying to get on top of that.
Well, either way, it was a perfect Friday for Max Verstappen and Red Bull. My thanks to Mark Priestley, Andrew Benson for being alongside myself, Harry Benjamin. You can join us for more track action. FP3 tomorrow at 11:30, green light. Qualifying then from 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Later on today as well, you can hear the preview show for the weekend and the reaction from after practice in the Checkered Flag podcast. So do check that out wherever you get your podcasts. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.